In the evolving landscape of political engagements, the media plays pivotal role in shaping narratives around women's participation. Addressing issues of unequal media representation has become critical, as biases and negative stereotyping can significantly deter women from engaging in politics. By establishing guidelines that promote fair and inclusive coverage, media can foster more representative political landscape that encourages female participation. Additionally, both social media platforms and traditional media serve as powerful tools for voter education, especially regarding the importance of gender inclusivity, exploring the impact of quota systems, the role of male advocates, and principles of inter-party democracy. Highlights how media can hold political parties accountable and encourage policies that empower women. Apparently, proactive media engagement can drive inclusive governance, support greater female representation, and address barriers to women's political engagement, ultimately contributing to a more balanced and equitable political environment in Nigeria. Tonight, we shall be discussing the role of media in promoting women's political participation. I am Ezenwa Wagu. Welcome to Electoral Reform Half Hour on NTA News 24 Abuja. This program is brought to you by Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa with support from MacArthur Foundation. Adora Onyechere Jack, Sydney Jack, is the Executive Director of Gender Strategy Advancement International, GSI, a civil society organization that promotes the principles of equality and inclusivity in elections and the media. And it's important that we recognize the role that Adora has played, being herself a contestant in, for House of Assembly in Imo State, and you have also been very a strong voice in most of the issues, especially in the strategy committee of the Not Too Young to Run movement. I think that that for me is the most important role that recommended you for being on my program this evening.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Adora.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Thank you.
For me, what was that drive? What was the thing that got you to want to leave the glamour and the glitz of media to go and run elections in Imo State?
I think it was the restlessness from the gaps that I saw even as a media professional while engaging politicians who were supposed to be representatives of voices of constituents, which was, I was one of them. And I think that also engaging back home, I could see that there was a big divide between the leadership and the led. But I think the biggest gap was where I saw that there were very few voices of women at the community level. Fear of, one, stereotype, secondly, lack of finance, three, lack of political literacy and platforming, and number four, the inability to have, access, in terms of amplifying their desire and their passion to contribute to leadership. And I think that was what the first inroad was. And, I started to, first of all, mute the idea. It was an idea, in my thoughts, but because I had relative anchoring by, specific kinds of mentorship, people like the late Esther Soma, and of course the Not Too Young to Run movement, which I was a part of. There was an ignition of desperation to be able to see how to fill that gap. And I think for me, it wasn't even about running in a winning party or it was just to make sure that the woman was able to come out from Okigwe local government constituency, be on the ballot, and also see how we can mobilize the voices of women for the first time. First, I was the youngest, and secondly, I was the first female to ever dare that, at that local government level. And when I went into the field, I certainly saw that, what you see on air is different from what you get off air. I think the first was, trying to get through the political party nominations. I ran under the Action Alliance then. and having to go back home to recreate a political party structure. And I think that was what I learned instructively for women. I mean, if women want to get into politics, they must also understand that they need to also help to build the political structure and the platform that they will emerge from. To run election is one thing, but to become strategic in the decisions within the party is one of the strongest inroads as a woman. And so it's not just about, getting into the party and, the role of woman leadership. It's also about the decisions that are being made. Where are the women voices on it? Where are they on the table? And considerably, because the party was quite, re-emerging as a party in the Southeast, it was fairer, and there was a lighter load of trying to get into the space and help to make decisions, which now opened doors of trust within the boys' club. That's what I would call it.
So, really, did your being a media personality, did it in any way, did you leverage on it in terms of media coverage?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that I got was the fact that I had already had some level of branding amplification from programming interventions. And I mean, ab initio before that, I've always been a strong voice for women. And so, gender mainstreaming advocacy came to the fore when I decided to, leave my job and then relocate back to the East a year and 8 months before the election. And so what that did for me was I began to, get in touch, have some conversation and mainstream within the local media. And I think that's what people need to know, that for an election to be won, first of all, it has to be won in the hearts of the people. You have to popularize your mandate, your manifesto. People need to understand who you are. And sometimes, the larger network of the media may not necessarily get to the grassroots.
How did you deal with stereotyping?
Well, stereotyping is something that even within the media, we had to deal with as professionals. And especially with issues around gender identities. First of all, you had the issue of women, having to make sure that they also participate in the meetings that hold at night, which is very nocturnal. And so that was the first exclusion method, I saw that patriarchy was, using to remove women from running, getting into the political space. But what the media does for me is that in order to amplify, I think it should also be able to give an equal level of playing field for both the man and the woman. Oftentimes I used to say, and I think I experienced it while getting into the field, is the fact that the media space is not as affordable as you think it is, even at the local level. So it's a case of the highest bidder takes all. It's a case of who is paying for airtime. It's a case of how many spots or slots do you have. And a lot of women may not have that kind of finance to be able to, pay for amplification or their conversations in the media. So what I was able to do was leverage, on local columnists, whom I had already formed a relationship with, whilst I was in the media. I happened to be fortunate at that time to be able to engage actively with the NUJ and the NAWATCH at the national, and so we were able to domesticate a lot of those network at the state level. But then that was because I had that sort of privilege. But I also saw women who were struggling. And for me, what I was able to also do was see how we can also leverage on my leverage to be able to expand the nest.
I get that part of women who are suffering, people. So how can regulatory bodies, do you think they can play any role in helping with, maybe some kind of codicils that take away this stereotyping and sometimes even shaming of women who want to aspire for political positions?
I mean, the easiest word we hear is when a woman wants to run, they will either say she's a prostitute or she's, she probably has, negotiated in some sort of canny way. I think those terminologies, need to be stopped. When you hear the NBC put laws out to say, we do not want hate speeches, we do not want, obscene words, we should also make sure that they have, conversations on creating policies to protect women, especially using wrong gender identities on air. And it starts from the policy regulation, system, the INEC, for instance, has a gender policy under its gender unit. Where does the conversation on gender identity really, is really, how is it mainstreamed in that body of work? And how do they engage the media to make sure that women are not, already excluded from the stereotyping that happens on air before they get into the field? And I think those are the policies framework I think that they may be able to want to consider. And again, the civil society as well. I feel that the civil society has the largest, cachet of duty here. And why do I say that? It's because oftentimes I see a lot of conversation around, women's participation, around quota system, around the need for, extra seats. But I believe that even when you give women those extra seats, it is those who will emerge that at the end of the day that will go through the election. So we need to protect that ecosystem by first of all identifying the limitations. And like you have said, the stereotypes are the first limitation. When women are frightened taking off the spaces because of one, they do not want to be, their family names, they do not want their family names to be damaged, they do not want to be ostracized because of the way they were, labeled during the election. I have seen women who lose families just because of stereotyping. So I feel that the ecosystem of the political space needs to first of all look at that as a vice against itself before we can even emerge talking about quota system.
A book came out of your participation, and I don't want to talk about that book. That's not where I want to go to. But I just have been thinking in terms of women participation. Okay. Gender inclusive advocacy around women participation. There does not seem to be a lot of push. I know there is even some kind of bifurcation between the older women and the younger women. What do you think can be done to get much more younger women, especially from the universities, getting interested in participating in leadership and governance and politics?
It starts, I think 2 months ago, we had a conversation on this on one of our conversation platforms, Gender Agenda, and what we talked about most importantly was, the strategy to have more young women, emerging at student union government level. And some of the issues that they had brought to the fore. We had young female students from UNA Abuja, some from Nasarawa State. We had a little convergence, and these young girls wanted to run for SUG. And for them, the problem was the fact that it wasn't that they didn't have capacity, but there was already a consensus candidate by the young men within the university caucus. And for them to be able to penetrate, they were saying that they were only allowed, the word was the allowance, to probably run for deputy secretary or treasurer.
Welfare secretary.
Yes, welfare secretary.
And vice president.
Absolutely. So for them, they were a bit worried because then going against the system was also going against a clan in such a way that they feel unprotected and exposed. So I feel that the school environment, first of all, where a young girl is allowed to thrive both educationally and skillfully. And in terms of this conversation, in governance, it starts from the university. It even starts from the secondary school. How do we expose them to leadership positions without, making it about the X or the Y chromosomes? Let's make it about, capacity of the mindset. And I think that that's where we need to start. And then secondly, I also feel that education through the media is also very important, that the media is able to, set a framework through their programming to be able to teach and give some level of learning to young girls to understand how to strategically engage in, policy literacy and governance. And these programs, like what you're doing right now, is one of such example that will be able to give a young girl the idea to say, you know what, I think I can do this, but what are the first steps? How do I engage and the way forward?
We're talking with Adora Onyechere Jack. We'll go on a break now. Electoral Reform Half Hour continues shortly. Stay with us. Glad to have you back. We're still speaking with her daughter, Onyechere Jack, and like I said, author, media personality, she's a whole pack, really. The profile that I have here, I didn't want to start running on through all of that. The big conversation right now is quota system, to enhance women's representation. Do you believe that such measures are necessary to attain gender parity and such other things?
It is, but it's not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. And why do I say that? Remember that when you're talking about the quota system, it has to go through different rankings and through different levels of government, and that's within the parliament system and the legislature. It's past second reading, and we're looking at 74 seats, which was, of course, sponsored by the Deputy Speaker Benjamin Kalu and some others. Albinisha will remember that this journey, this trajectory of quota system started in the 9th Assembly, earlier sponsored by former Deputy Chief Whip, who is now Minister of Labour, Nkiruka Onyejocha, and 88 others. It went through the process of the 5 gender bills. We saw how that went. Nigerian women marched in mass to the National Assembly, but it was still turned down.
Nigerian women and men.
Yes.
Because I marched.
Okay, yes, I remember that. And then they marched in mass, but, it was still turned down until 3 were repelled. However, the question from a lot of the legislators who were men was that, the women didn't lobby enough, we didn't sit around the round tables enough, and we should have started from the lowest hanging fruit and just decided to take them in piecemeal. And so that's what has been done in this 10th Assembly. And with that passage, passing it for the second reading and getting into the strategic conversations in committees to see how, it will get through the National Assembly public hearing, I think there's a bigger danger ahead. And I say this because even when you pass it at the National Assembly, it goes back to the State Assembly. And that is where the governors take the systems. And I believe that the conversation of the quota system should be domesticated. And when we have domestication of this demand, the people will own it. The women at the grassroots will be the ones demanding because they feel a sense of belonging in the conversation. And I think that's always, my worry, that we start these conversations first from the top and then we get to the bottom and then we're going through a 360 degree. I believe there should be a bottom-up approach so that by the time it finally gets to the National Assembly, there is a consensus, some level of agreement between the State Assembly, the governors. A lot of lobbying would have been done, a lot of conversation on what and where. And remember, these people are also talking about numbers. And when you're talking about numbers, by the time you try this quota system, which is supposed to be a 4-year circle trial, which will give 16 years of trial, by that time we would have seen a lot more women in the National Assembly. The question is, are the men also giving quota system to try for 4 years, for 4 cycle of election for 16 years? So it's still there's still limitation, it's still exclusive. There's still a stereotype in the demands that are being made.
That comes to the point where people like you are not telling your stories enough. You were not looking for quota when you ventured.
No.
You didn't care about that. And you didn't want any special treatment.
Absolutely not.
Because you were bringing competence, your capacity, and the experience that you have. And that was what you went to sell to the people. So those who quarrel, if you like, who argue against the quota are saying, what are those big challenges? Maybe because of your own personal experience too. Are there reasons that you confronted in the space that eventually makes you think that perhaps we need things like quota, we need special seats and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, my story may not be the story of the next woman who may have capacity but doesn't have access. And I think it's good to tell ourselves the truth because at the end of the day, women are the minority in the conversation of politics and governance. And I take for example, when we ran at the time when we ran election, we were just about 14 women amongst 112 men who were running. And by the time we were done with primaries, we were just 3 of us left. So, and the reason for that was based on finance, was based on access, was based on role in terms of mentorship and perhaps during consultation there was a need for some people to feel that some people needed to step down. And when they looked at the benefits, they felt, oh, going the long haul, probably they wouldn't have enough in terms of mental strength to go through it. But there are women who can, but may not have the opportunity in terms of finance, may not have the opportunity in terms of access. So what we are saying is that if we have a quota system, I mean, Kenya, has done pretty well with that. We have about 6 governors in Kenya recently from the last 2023 election. We have Namibia, we have, Seychelles, we even have Gambia. And then we have, of course, Rwanda continues to take that lead in parliament. But we're not saying that we are like any of these countries. Our issues are dynamic. Reflecting on our election circle, we are not there yet, but we are an evolving political ecosystem, and our democracy is also evolving. And in the sense of evolution, I'm hoping that the conversation on quota is also part of the evolution to open up the space so that other younger women can also come into the space and take advantage.
We're running on a home stretch now, away from your 40, this is your strong 40, I know that. You are also a well-traveled journalist and a broadcaster. There are big issues that are on the table for reform in Nigerian legislature as we speak. I want you to share your thoughts. 3 key issues. What do you think about conducting all elections in one day? The second one is, where do you stand on the issue of diaspora voting?
Well,
and the third one is the early voting stuff. All of this, that there should be early voting. As a journalist, you probably will be on duty, you don't vote. So what are your thoughts in those reform issues? Because the Electoral Act is the most, if you like, the most reformed law in Nigeria. Amended piece of legislation, as I like to say. I would like to share your thoughts as we go on the home stretch.
I mean, it is the most excoriated document because, in every conversation, in every home, in every parlor, people are talking about electoral reforms, electoral act, what's working and what's not working. And I usually say, give them one day to be the INEC chairman, they will do exactly the same thing, or even, without any idea, because it is a tough space. And I can tell you that because Nigeria in itself is not just about the electoral system, it's also about the people we are also electing. It's about the political space. It's about the politicians, and it's also about the followership. But going down to what you're saying, like I mentioned earlier, our electoral system is evolving. And, even when we say we are talking about that, I mean, yesterday we were talking about independent candidacy with a few young people who felt that, it was a long stretch, but it was the way to start, especially for those who felt they had capacity but didn't have, the network. But most importantly, I would say diaspora voting, I think, is key because, one, they are a generic space that also contribute to our GDP and do have the ability to want to say and decide who and where their money goes and how it's been done.
This is where we're going to draw the curtain. You have so much to give, but on this episode of Electoral Reform Half Hour, we wish to specially thank Adore Onyeochere Sydney Jack for your time and contributions on the program. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you
so very much for being here. Electoral Reform Half Hour is brought to you by the Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa with support from MacArthur Foundation. We are live every Saturday from 8:30 p.m. and they repeat to 9 p.m. with a repeat broadcast every Sunday, 2:30 p.m. on this same station. You can contact us on our social media handles showing on your TV screen. Thank you for watching. I am Ezem Wawagu. Thank you so very much.